Welcome to the Unstoppable Freedom Podcast. I'm Jimmy Page. The topics of gun rights, gun ownership, and gun safety are frequently a topic of discussion and debate, especially, and unfortunately, in politics. There are relentless calls for more gun control laws and gun bans every time there's a mass shooting or a crime committed with a firearm. And anytime we enter an election cycle, the debate heats up again and again. Well, thankfully, there are organizations whose singular mission is to defend our ability to defend ourselves, to defend our families, and to defend our loved ones. Our guest today is Taylor Rhodes, and he's the executive director of Rocky Mountain Gun Owners in Colorado. He has worked tirelessly to restore Colorado's individual liberties by using non-traditional, no-compromise lobbying tactics. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. And with over 200,000 members, RMGO is making a big difference in the fight to keep our constitutionally protected right to keep and bear arms. Taylor, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
You bet, man. I appreciate this. I noticed in your bio that you have a master's degree from Liberty University, and I just want to let you know we've got a lot in common. My three sons have graduated from Liberty, and my daughter is a junior there right now.
Oh, awesome. I loved my master's degree experience. The funny thing is, of course, I did most of it online. So the first time that I actually stepped on campus was my graduation day.
Come on.
But I loved my time at Liberty. I'm very thankful for having a Christian background in education, and I think just what we're doing right now. We're not just in a war of Republicans versus Democrats. We're in a war versus good versus evil.
Yes.
And the Bible tells us if two or three of us gather together and humble ourselves.
Yes.
We can't forget that. We humble ourselves and pray to God. He'll hear from us and he'll heal our land.
Yes.
So that's what we need in this country. We need a massive healing of our land, and we're fighting the political front. Because the Bible also says faith without works is dead.
Yes.
So we're burning it at both ends.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I love about Liberty University. And I want to ask you when you graduated, not to put you on the spot, but what year did you walk across the stage?
So just 2 years ago now, I earned my master's degree.
That's amazing because the campus, okay, my son started there, I think in 2013 or I think give or take, and it was nothing compared to what it is today. He got the benefit of watching it kind of grow up around him. Pretty impressive campus, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really cool. It's funny. When we first got on campus, I was just amazed. I did my undergraduate at the University of Southern Mississippi. And no knock on Southern Miss. I loved my undergraduate experience. I would not trade it for anything. However, when you step on campus at Liberty today, I jokingly say Liberty has more money than Kellogg's has cornflakes. And it is a representation of how nice that campus is.
Yes.
And the work that they're doing, not just on the academic side, but really training champions for Christ.
Yes.
Which is their motto. I'm a living, breathing, walking proof of that.
It's amazing.
I strive to be a champion for Christ.
Yeah, no question. And it's funny. I was going to mention that very thing, that they are creating champions for Christ, people that are mission oriented. And you mentioned real quick right off the bat that this is not a left right issue, although it always shows up left right. I mean,
of course it does.
It always shows up that way, but it really is there's a much bigger spiritual battle going on, and it is a battle between good and evil. And I think in terms of why we need to remember as believers in particular, that this is a spiritual battle, that we've got to win in the spiritual realm first, using those weapons of prayer, being in God's word, being filled with the Holy Spirit, so that when we do speak, we're speaking with authority, with power, and also seasoned with salt, right? I mean, some of this is, we don't want to fight everybody all the time, although there's plenty of time for that. But we have to make our arguments in such a way that we're winning over people that may not see it our way. Do you see it that way?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, RMGO has a little bit of a different way that we approach politics in general. And I have in turn swallowed that pill, and I'm 100% believer in our tactics. But we are in this fight that even though John Doe, we actually office above a gun shop. You would be amazed of how many blue-haired Bernie bros walk into this gun shop and are looking to buy their first ever gun because they're worried about the state of our country,
Yes.
And the state of our state,
Yeah.
and really even down to the state of their community. And we see so many people from Denver that walk through the door here that say, I don't feel safe in my own home anymore.
Yes.
Because of the homeless encampments
Yes.
around. And when we look at, the overall problem of gun violence, the left often wants to, summarize it up into the tool that is used,
Yeah.
the weapon itself.
Yeah.
But in reality, it's much more complex than that. We really have a three-tiered problem. Number one, we have a problem and an issue that we are over-medicating our kids from a very young age on some type of stabilizing drug, whether that be an ADHD medication, whether that be a antidepressant medication. It's the statistic is right around 95% of the average mass shooter is on one of those types of medications. Number two, they almost always happen in gun-free zones. Again, it's upward 90%. And almost even higher of a statistic, and something that I am extremely passionate about, is men. We as men have a problem in this country. Men are not stepping up to be men. We are not leading our home. We're not leading our families in the way that we should.
That's right.
The way that Christ calls us to lead our families.
Yes.
When you look at the average mass shooter, they almost always come from a broken home where the father is absent. They do not have a father figure.
Yeah.
And men need to step up and be that father figure in their home and in their community, because ultimately, when we look at the welfare state, people are incentivized not to have a unified family.
Of course.
And we have to fight back against that. So the issue, while it is a gun rights issue, that is what the left has made it.
Yeah.
It's a much broader conversation.
I love that. I think you've hit on three. I mean, the fact that those are the three big ones, right, with any major gun mass shooting in particular. But the truth is, those three things are at the root and the core of all of our gun violence. This is not, and again, you can commit acts of violence with anything: a knife, a bat, a pencil. I mean, if you've watched any of the John Wick series, you know that you can kill somebody with a pencil. It really isn't. It doesn't really matter what the tool is. It really lies in the heart of man. And so I'm going to dig in on those three issues a little later in the show. But for now, I wanted to focus a little bit more specifically on Rocky Mountain gun owners. And you said that you in your bio, you also said you like to collect firearms. Big shocker there. You like Rocky's baseball, which I don't know how.
It's tough.
But what I really was struck by was this. You love bringing political pain to politicians. Now, I'm perfectly aligned with that because I don't think our politicians represent us very well. Again, talk a little bit about the method of bringing political pain to politicians. What do you mean?
So at the end of the day, politicians respond to two things. And of course, we're speaking metaphorically here. I'm not calling for an act of violence,
of course,
on any elected official. But politicians respond to two things. They're a lot like dogs. They respond to pleasure and they respond to pain. What do I mean by that? Pleasure. They respond to positive endorsements, seeing their name in the paper in a positive way, money going into their campaign, tons of volunteers, winning their election. The list goes on and on. But really what they respond to is pain.
Yeah.
Putting their election in jeopardy. Elections are the life and death of politicians. And if you can put their election in jeopardy, you can sway their vote and change public policy. We've seen this just this last session when the assault weapons ban was going through our legislature. It was the biggest political operation that I had ever overseen. We ended up having over, I want to say it was like 103,000 petitions signed that we delivered to every legislator in the state. And when people see those petitions, and specifically those that have ambition to run for governor or attorney general or secretary of state or whatever, they're like, oh crap, this small little 2 or 3% of the total electorate could completely change how my election goes, even if it's not the one I'm up for next. So bringing that political pain is so crucial to making politicians forcing politicians to do exactly what you want them to do.
It's amazing.
Because remember, they do not work. They work for you. It's not the other way around.
That's right.
You do not work for them. They work for you.
Right.
And sometimes, just like any good employer, you have to remind them of that.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad you brought this up with that specific legislation. So as a Colorado resident in a liberal town, which is increasingly spreading across the state, unfortunately, there comes a point when sometimes you don't believe that you can actually stop this train. Our legislature they have a super majority, essentially. I mean, they have a majority where they can pass almost any legislation they want. They're doing it in many respects. And I remember, Taylor, when this legislation came in, I just kind of thought to myself, we are in deep, deep trouble. I was one of the signers of that petition.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for doing what you're doing. But I didn't think we had a snowball's chance in where of winning or of defeating any of that legislation. But we did. And the reason I want to sit on that for a second is there are people just like me who don't believe in their blue states that they can stop the legislature from enacting these unconstitutional restrictions on access to guns to protect yourself. But let's talk about the other pieces of legislation. Let's just go there right now, because that wasn't the only piece of legislation in Colorado. Let's talk about the 4 or 5 key ones, because I want to demonstrate to people that it really does matter that their voice is heard. So what were the other elements of legislation in Colorado?
Right. Well, before we move on, it is critical to touch on something you just said. They want you to think that there's no way we can stop it.
Yes.
When they introduced this bill, I kind of rained on their parade. I showed up to their press conference and I interrupted and said, look, many federal judges have already ruled, it was like half of these bills that they introduced, unconstitutional.
Yes.
Are you okay with forcing your caucus to do so? And this is not just on the gun issue. This is on every issue that we care about as Christian conservatives.
Yes.
We need to force the politicians to answer for what they are doing, not just after they've done it, but while they are doing it.
Yes.
So I'll start with the ones that we won on.
Great.
Because those are more fun to talk about.
Yeah, yes, they are.
First, we won on the assault weapons ban issue. Now, if you're sitting at home and you're like, well, I'd never heard about this, I was living under a rock, let me just give you a brief background. This assault weapons ban would have been the worst in the nation. It would have made California's assault weapons ban look like a conservative policy.
Jeez.
It literally banned every semi-automatic rifle and handgun, for the most part. If it could accept a compensator, if it had a muzzle or a barrel shroud, which literally means that you could hold something over it without burning your hand. That's how the bill wrote. This went after many semi-automatic shotguns. Essentially, the list was literally easier to describe what would be allowed than what wouldn't be allowed.
Wow.
So essentially, your bolt guns and your lever action rifles are okay.
Yeah.
Your revolvers are okay. Everything else, get rid of it, turn it in. It's being confiscated.
Well, and real quick on that. So I remember this, and I remember thinking, I'm going to have to give up. They're essentially making every gun that I own illegal.
Correct.
And that was what was so scary about this legislation. So you're saying it's worse in California. Well, I think there are many millions of Americans that are concerned about anything looking like California at this point. From the economy to the gun restrictions and all the rest of it, even free speech and the educational system. We're all kind of pushing back against that. That's why that bill, talk a little bit about assault weapons, that term. It is kicked around by everybody. I've heard people at the highest levels of government describe what an assault weapon is, and they have no idea what they're talking about. Is there such a thing as an assault weapon?
This pen is an assault weapon if I stab you with it. You would not want to be stabbed by that pen, as we were talking about earlier.
Right.
It is a catchy jargon phrase that the left has come up with. Between leftist Democrats and Donald Trump, we have come up with a ton of good catchy phrases for things. For example, red flag, that was a term that was coined by RMGO. That set the table for the rest of the country because in 2016, 2017, 2018, and then finally was enacted into law in 2019, these conversations were being had about red flag. And that was a term that we came up with. And it really, those terms stick with the first one that comes up with it. They just stick.
Yeah.
So, the messaging and the coining of these terms are so important. But what is an assault weapon? I don't know. The pistol on my hip's an assault weapon. If I shoot you with it, my AR-15 is certainly an assault weapon.
Yes.
Again, this pen is an assault weapon.
Yeah.
If I stab you with it,
yeah.
I mean, assault is a verb, not an adjective.
Yeah, and I think people get afraid of it, right? So when people say assault weapon, oh my gosh, most the moms in the homes and the kid, nobody understands what this is, and they think that's horrible. For a lot of people, guns are scary already. So when you call something an assault weapon, or worse yet, you've heard this phrase, weapon of war, which clearly an AR-15 is not a weapon of war, not if you want to win. But people don't understand what these weapons actually do.
Right. And there are some military backings to the term assault weapon. M4s were considered assault weapons, which is kind of the big brother of the AR-15. But you're also talking about select fire or fully automatic weapons, which an AR-15 is not, at least the way you buy it over the counter.
Yeah.
So on top of the assault weapons ban, there was a bill, it was House Bill 1165, that would have banned shooting on private property. This would have put private property gun owners around the state that have ranges on their private property at stake, that their county commission or their town board or some local government could come in and ban shooting on their property.
Yep.
So we got two really significant wins.
That's big.
In those two. Now, there was a handful of Democrats that voted right on those two bills, which obviously I'm thankful for. But unfortunately, there was 5 others that did pass, 2 of which we have already filed lawsuits over.
Good.
We're planning on filing a third, pending that we can raise some more money.
Yeah, well, that's good. And I love it. And we all are realizing the power of the courts, right? We have a very close relationship with First Liberty Institute, which is a legal defense organization, lawyers all over the country that are defending our freedoms. We've got a very close relationship with Alliance Defending Freedom and with many others. We know now that when we fight, we win. I mean, a couple podcasts ago, we talked with one of the lead attorneys for First Liberty, and she talked about that. Hey, when we fight, when we have the courage to stand up for our God-given inalienable rights and the constitutional protection of those rights, we actually do win, whether it's religious freedom or gun rights. So, and I think that's a big point to press here, right? Because that's why what you're doing is so important, because you are contesting this in the courts. Tell us a little bit about the litigation that you've started.
Now, before I go into the individual lawsuits, it's really important to describe what actually teed up all of this. So for you and maybe even your listeners that are listening or watching, last summer we had one of the largest landmark Supreme Court decisions in American history on guns. This would be the New York Pistol and Rifle Association v. Bruen. For short, I call it the Bruen decision. Now, the Bruen decision, the meat and potatoes of it don't really matter. It was a case that was talking about the ability to carry outside of your home, and it made every state in the country a shall issue state, meaning that if you pass your background check, you do all the stupid classwork that you have to do, the government shall issue you a permit. They shall. They cannot deny you a permit. Where that's all great and good. Of course, we want that, but that only affected a handful of states: New York, Illinois, California. There might have been 1 or 2 others that were still may issue states. What really changed is what's called intermediate scrutiny. Now, I'm not an attorney. I don't play one on TV, but the way I understand intermediate scrutiny is the cost benefit analysis of a proposal or a law or a bill. So for decades, judges would say, well, yes, you do have your constitutional right to own, let's say, an AR-15, but there's a made-up stat, don't quote me on this, but 95% of mass shootings are done by AR-15s. It's a benefit to society that we have an assault weapons ban on the books. That's no longer the case. Now, The courts can only decide gun regulations based on the text, history, and tradition of the Second Amendment.
Wow.
Furthermore, it is now not incumbent upon us, the plaintiffs, to prove that it is unconstitutional. It's on the government to prove that it is constitutional.
Fantastic.
So it changes that burden of proof. So that is teed up of a lot of the cases that we are fighting on right now. Just this week, we had a hearing for a preliminary injunction in front of a federal judge where we have already sued on Colorado's mandatory 3-day waiting periods. So now we're waiting back for a ruling on that preliminary injunction. We drew a bad judge. He is late 80s. He's been on the bench for 40-something years. He was a Jimmy Carter appointee.
Wow.
So we drew a bad judge, but obviously we have the Constitution on our side, and we have the precedent of the Bruin decision on our side. So even if we lose at the district court level, we think that we have a really good chance of winning in the 10th Circuit.
Amazing.
On top of that, we've already been granted a preliminary injunction against Colorado's new 18 to 21-year-old gun ban. So they passed a bill this year that bans 18 to 21-year-olds from purchasing any firearms. So federal law says you can't purchase a handgun. Colorado took it one step further and said you can't purchase a long gun. Now, where it gets really interesting is it's not just 18 to 21. That's the legal purchasing age. Let's say you and your son go out and are hunting, and your son is 16 years old. You are carrying the rifle. You see a huge elk that's within range that you want to take down, put meat in your freezer. Your son's never shot an elk before. You hand him the gun. The Parks and Wildlife comes up behind you, sees him with the gun. You are now a criminal because you have transferred that gun to someone under the age of 21.
Wow.
So this bill was not just going after constitutional freedoms. It's going after a way of life.
Wow.
Here in Colorado that, so many people that have grown up hunting and shooting and fishing and spending time outdoors where, in Colorado's mountains, you need a firearm. You do. I don't go out in the mountains without a 10-millimeter pistol, at least. Most of the time I have more. But those are the two that we've already sued over.
Yeah, that's great.
Now we're looking at suing over Colorado's ghost gun ban. Now, ghost gun is just a scary term that the left has come up with to detail unserialized firearms. Now, most firearms described by the ATF have to be serialized on the lower receiver. Colorado's bill actually says any readily convertible receiver. So, meaning if you have an AR upper, technically the way the bill reads, you have to have that serialized. I don't know if that's how they'll enforce it, but that is how the bill reads. So we're currently raising money right now to get that filed. It goes into effect on the first of the year, and so we are fighting tooth and nail for every penny we can get right now.
Yeah.
And if you're listening to this and you want to be a part of that, go to RMGO.org. When you first get there, you'll see a slider for the legal fund. Literally every penny helps. We need all the help we can get.
Well, and our audience is very familiar with the legal approach to this because, on other issues such as religious freedom, we've seen Coach Kennedy go through an 8-year process to allow him to continue to pray on the field following football games at a high school football game. Again, landmark cases, just like you talked about that New York Bruin case. It's, these cases are important. Let's talk a little bit about a couple of hot button issues, red flag laws. Let's talk a little, because you said you coined the term, and that makes me really mad now because it's being used against us. Let's talk about the red flag laws.
Yeah, so red flag laws initially passed in 2019 here after two Republicans in coordination with the NRA helped write it.
Wow.
Yeah, that's always fun.
Jeez.
George Brockler, if you remember him, he helped write our red flag law, and then former Douglas County Sheriff Tony Spurlock helped write that red flag law. Initially, that red flag law allowed close family members to file an order or police to file an order that says Jimmy is crazy, he has guns, go take them. This last year, talking about legislation that's already passed, this last year they expanded that. So now not only can your close family red flag you and police officers, now district attorneys can red flag you, your doctor can red flag you. Let's say that you and your wife are going to marriage counseling. Your marriage counselor, because they are a certified therapist, can red flag you. But worst of all, your child's school teacher can red flag you.
Yep.
We have all seen all over the country, famously in Virginia, that parents that have shown up irritated at school board meetings are being deemed as terrorists.
Yes.
You don't think that the administrators of these schools are going to red flag people? You're nuts. This is definitely going to happen. This law is already ripe with abuse. The statistic is right around 80% of the red flag orders that have been filed while that has been in effect are fraudulent, meaning they're someone that's disgruntled is filing this.
Well, and one of the things that really concerns me about this, you touched on education, sorry to interrupt, is that there is this adversarial relationship that our politicians have created, and our DOJ and all the rest, between teachers, and our unions are doing this as well. They're creating this us versus them situation where we have an adversarial relationship where parents' rights, we have to fight now to get parents' rights back, where we can direct and we're responsible for all aspects of the upbringing of our children. There's this tug of war between who owns our kids. That's what's happening. So if you weaponize the school system against parents, this red flag law is going to be used extensively. And one of the things that really bugs me is that our founders envisioned a day when all of our citizens had a high level of trust of each other and a very low level of trust in the government. And what we see now is this upending of that, where no, they're saying the government is the savior, trust us, and don't trust each other. And that is driving me bonkers, because the last thing we want to do is tell on our neighbors. But we saw that start in the COVID fiasco, when we started to ask our neighbors to tell people if you weren't following the rules with mask mandates or a host of other things.
Yeah, during that time I was unluckily living in downtown Denver.
Wow.
In the summer of love, as I call it. And that summer I was living in an apartment complex. The apartment had like all of these tip lines that you could call. And of course, if you did go outside, there were rioters all over the place. So, it was, again, okay, well, if you're rioting in the streets, sure, go out and enjoy.
Right.
But if you just want to go and grab a hamburger, you're like, second-class citizen.
Oh, exactly. Well, you must have been at risk then, because obviously you're pretty high profile in what you do. And all of a sudden somebody wants to report you through this red flag law. Do you feel like you were vulnerable at that time?
I feel like I'm vulnerable every day. Over the last year, my profile has risen pretty substantially, especially on the online circuits, and the people that I hang out with. So, security for me is always a big deal. The death threats and things like that are always coming in. It is not a fun life to live, especially during the heat of the fights. But I'm happy to do it. It is especially during that time. Actually, it wasn't as bad then. In the last year or so is really when a lot of the threats and claims of violence against me and my family have really ticked up. And ultimately, I hope they break into my house while I'm there. Just not when I'm not there. If they break in and want to cause harm on me, I guarantee I'm trained and a better shot than they are.
Oh, yeah.
It'll be quick work.
Well, I'll tell you this, what you're experiencing is pretty common now about anybody that is willing to stand up for our constitutionally protected freedoms. And really, these aren't rights that are granted by the government. These are given by God. The first natural right is the right to self-defense. It's the right to protect yourself from physical, mental, emotional harm. You have the ability to do that. Our founders referred to this as the first natural right, because without it, you have no other rights. If someone can come in and take your life and you can't defend yourself, doesn't matter what your other rights are, because it's over. But let's shift gears just a little bit. I want to ask you, one of the things I found interesting about Rocky Mountain gun owners is that you talk about having accepting no compromise, right? And there's a lot of fair-minded, reasonable people. Well, thanks for listening to part one of a two-part series with Taylor Rhodes, the executive director of Rocky Mountain Gun Owners in Colorado. I know this was informative, but stay tuned for part two next week, because we're going to get real practical about ways that you can maintain your right to defend yourself, your families, and your property. See you next time.